Okay, so from like a normal childhood, I mean like a modest Soviet apartment, all the way to being like one of the most powerful people in the world right now,
Yeah.
a figure whose influence, I mean, we see it everywhere from Eastern Europe to, global diplomacy. Like today on Dansplain, we're going deep into the life and times of Vladimir Putin.
Hey, everyone, and welcome back to Dansplain. I'm Edward.
And I'm Lily. In this deep dive, we're going after this question that I think like a lot of you have probably thought about. Who is Vladimir Putin? What made him the way he is? What are like the things that drive his worldview and the things that he does? We read a ton to figure out like what we thought were the most important insights about this dude, this complex and super important person.
Yeah, so we looked at a lot of really detailed accounts of his life, and his journey through politics and how he rose to power. And we looked at a bunch of different analyses of his psychology and what he's trying to do long term. And today we're going to connect all the dots for you, go past the headlines, and try to give you a much better picture of everything that has shaped Vladimir Putin.
So you've definitely seen his name everywhere. I mean, probably a zillion times. You've probably thought about who is this guy, beyond the headlines. We're going to unpack all of that. And we're going to start with his early life. Vladimirovich Putin was born October 7th, 1952 in Leningrad, which is St. Petersburg now.
It's crazy how different his global power now is from how normal his beginnings were. His father was a decorated World War II vet who worked as a factory foreman after the war. And his mother was also a factory worker. And he lived in one of those communal apartments, which was pretty normal in the Soviet Union after World War II, where you had a bunch of families sharing a kitchen and a bathroom. So that kind of environment, with shared resources and probably some collective hardship after this huge conflict.
Yeah.
That's important to know when we're thinking about the beginning of his life.
Totally, yeah. And you can't forget about the siege of Leningrad. I mean, Putin himself was born after it, but his family went through it, and his brother actually died during the siege. That kind of historical trauma, even if it's through family stories and stuff, that can have a big impact on someone's view of the world and their sense of identity.
For sure. It probably made him think a lot about being strong and resilient, and probably made him really care about national strength and survival. Most people say he was pretty quiet as a kid, kind of reserved even.
Yeah.
But it wasn't simple, Some stories say that he was kind of rebellious, that he liked to get into fights, there was more to him than met the eye.
Yeah, he wasn't just sitting around watching. And academically, he was an average student. But then he got into martial arts when he was 12, judo and sambo. And that's where we see him really focusing and committing to something. He actually got a black belt. And this is where it gets really interesting. How much did that martial arts stuff influence how he leads and does politics?
That's a really cool connection. Think about one of the main things in judo, maximum efficiency, minimum effort. It's using your opponent's weight and momentum against them, getting the biggest result without using a lot of energy. Do you think we see that in how he does politics? Maybe he likes using tactics that aren't straightforward, or taking advantage of what he sees as weaknesses in his opponents. The discipline and the focus on strategy, the whole thing about developing mental and physical control, those are all super important in martial arts. And they seem to match up with his style of governing.
It's almost all that time on the mat was training him, not just for fighting, but for thinking strategically. So after high school, he went to Leningrad State University to study law, which was a big step. And he also joined the Communist Party.
Right, that was super important. Back in the Soviet Union, being in the Communist Party was a requirement for a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
Especially in law and government. And it's important to remember that universities were often places where the KGB recruited people. The KGB was the main intelligence agency in the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So him being involved in student politics probably caught their attention. And sure enough, in 1975, they recruited him.
That's a huge turn. From wanting to be a lawyer to becoming an intelligence officer, he went through a ton of training, learned how to be a spy and how to do counterintelligence. And then he got sent to East Germany. That was a really important time for him.
Oh, yeah. His time in Dresden in East Germany, that was super important for how he sees the world. He wasn't just learning about intelligence work. He was living in the middle of the Cold War. Seeing the tension between the East and the West up close, those experiences, seeing everything through the lens of intelligence and counterintelligence, that had a huge impact on how he sees international relations, and probably made him really distrust the West.
So now let's jump ahead to 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. Huge moment. Putin quits the KGB and goes back to St. Petersburg. And that's where his political career really starts. He becomes an advisor to the mayor, Anatoly Sobchak. And it's crazy how fast he moved up in the city government. By 1994, he was the first deputy mayor.
And what's interesting is like the reputation he built. He wasn't like some politicians who are super charismatic and love the spotlight. Putin was known for being efficient and, most importantly, being super loyal to Sobchak. Those things might not seem flashy, but they're really important in politics. They helped him get things done and gain the trust of people with power.
Totally. And when Sobchak lost the election in 1996, Putin didn't just disappear. He went to Moscow and started working for Boris Yeltsin, who was president then. He had all these different important roles, and he kept moving up. Eventually, he became the head of the FSB, which is like the KGB, but after the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
It shows how good he was at navigating the crazy world of Kremlin politics.
Really does. He was good at building trust and showing that he was competent. You know, in the world of the Kremlin, which can be really secretive and shady, his background in intelligence probably gave him a unique advantage in that world. And then in August 1999, Yeltsin made him prime minister. That showed that Yeltsin really trusted him. But I don't think many people knew what that would mean in the future.
Right. Then on December 31st, 1999, Yeltsin suddenly resigns. Totally out of the blue. And just like that, Vladimir Putin becomes the acting president of Russia. Crazy. Then he wins the election in 2000, and he's been in charge of Russia ever since. Switching back and forth between president and prime minister, that's a really long time to be in power.
Yeah, and he's been super clear about what he wants to do. He's focused on national security, making Russia's economy stable after all the chaos of the 90s, and making Russia a powerful force in the world again. But a lot of people around the world have criticized him for things like being too authoritarian, cracking down on people who disagree with him, controlling the media, and using military force to get what he wants.
Which makes us wonder about like the guy himself, like his psychology and how he leads. Being in the KGB definitely changed him. People say he's pragmatic, he calculates everything, and he doesn't trust the West at all.
Yeah, that distrust is definitely a theme.
Yeah.
People who study psychology say he's got a strong need to be in charge. He's ambitious and really conscientious. Like he's super careful and detail-oriented. But he's also suspicious of people, and he's willing to take risks if he thinks it through. Like we talked about before, he really values loyalty and discipline. And he thinks a strong central government is super important.
And we can't ignore how his martial arts training might have affected him. You know, the whole idea of being strong, staying in control, outsmarting your opponent. That seems to be how he governs, too. Both inside Russia with his political rivals and on the world stage with other countries, he's patient and strategic. He waits for the right moment to make a move. And sometimes he uses these unexpected tactics that catch people off guard, kind of like in martial arts.
Yeah, it's like he's playing chess on the world stage. Always looking for an opening, a way to use someone's strength against them. And he said many times that he sees the collapse of the Soviet Union as like a disaster, like a really bad thing that happened to Russia. And that's really important to understanding why he does what he does. He thinks the West, especially the U.S., took advantage of Russia when it was weak after the Soviet Union fell apart. And that's why he's so determined to make Russia strong again, to push back against the West and make Russia a major player in the world.
Okay, so let's talk about something that's kind of mysterious. His money and his financial power. Nobody knows for sure, but a lot of people think he's got a massive amount of money, like maybe tens of billions of dollars, maybe even hundreds of billions. The fact that the estimates are so different shows how secretive all of this is.
Right. Like what he says officially about how much money he has, that doesn't really add up. But a lot of people think he hides his wealth. Like he uses other people and companies to hold it for him. And he uses these super rich guys called oligarchs who are loyal to him. These are people who got really rich, especially in the 90s when Russia was privatizing a lot of industries.
And it looks like early on when he became president, he consolidated his power. He got rid of some oligarchs who he thought were disloyal or a threat, like Mikhail Khodorkovsky. But the oligarchs who stayed loyal to him, they were allowed to keep getting richer. Some people call this state-sponsored corruption because these rich guys are basically protecting Putin's interests. They help him financially and politically. And it all gets kind of blurry, like where does private wealth end and state power begin?
Yeah, that connection between Putin and the oligarchs, it's really important. The oligarchs get rich from being close to power. They get access to good business deals and government contracts. And in return, they help Putin by protecting his money and giving him more power. They do things that would be difficult or politically risky for the government to do directly.
Which leads us to his big goals. What is he really trying to do in the long run? It seems like one of his main goals is to make Russia a global superpower again, a country that can challenge the U.S. We see this in how he's used military force in places like Ukraine, Syria, and the Middle East. He wants Russia to be a dominant force in those regions, places that Russia sees as part of its historical sphere of influence.
Yeah, and what's happening in Ukraine is really important for understanding his strategy. He took Crimea in 2014, and then there's the full-scale invasion that started in 2022. He sees Ukraine in a very specific way. He emphasizes the historical and cultural ties between Russia and Ukraine. And he really doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO or the European Union. He sees that as a threat. So those conflicts, they're basically him challenging the West, challenging the whole security structure that the West has built.
When you look at the big picture people who study these things, they debate about what Putin's ultimate vision is. Is he trying to make Russia great again like it was in the past? Or is he mainly trying to stay in power himself? He changed the Constitution in 2020, which could let him be president until 2036. That shows that he's thinking long term. He wants to leave a legacy, but nobody knows for sure what his endgame is.
It's probably a mix of both. He wants Russia to be powerful, and he wants to be remembered as a great leader.
Yeah.
Changing the Constitution definitely shows he's thinking way ahead.
Okay, now let's talk about how he presents himself to the world. There's this whole carefully crafted image of him, the strong, decisive leader who likes doing manly things like judo and hockey and horseback riding. There are all these photos of him doing these activities. It's all very staged. What's he trying to do with that?
He's trying to create an image of strength and power. He wants people in Russia to feel proud and secure because they have a strong leader. And he wants to show the rest of the world that Russia is a force to be reckoned with. It's all part of a narrative, a story he's telling about himself as the leader who can make Russia great again and protect its interests.
And then there's his personal life. He's incredibly private. Like, we know he was married to Lyudmila Shkribneva for 30 years, and they have 2 daughters, Maria and Katerina. But they're very much out of the public eye. And then there are all these rumors about other children that nobody can confirm. It's pretty unusual for a leader to be this private, especially nowadays when everyone's on social media and in the news all the time.
Yeah, it's like he's built a wall around his personal life. He doesn't want people to know about it. Maybe it's for security reasons, or maybe he just wants to keep his private life completely separate from his public life.
Right.
Just makes him even more mysterious.
So lastly, let's talk about how people see him and his legacy. Inside Russia, he's pretty popular. A lot of people think he brought stability and made Russia proud again after the chaos of the 90s. But outside of Russia, his legacy is way more complicated. There are a lot of controversies. People accuse him of corruption and human rights abuses, and they say he's damaged democracy in Russia. He's a very polarizing figure. People either love him or hate him.
Yeah, it's a very divided picture. In Russia, a lot of people like the idea of a strong leader who's making Russia powerful again. But in other parts of the world, opinions are split. Some people see him as a defender of Russia against the West, but others see him as a dangerous authoritarian who's making the world less stable.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's clear that Vladimir Putin's story is really interesting. He came from pretty normal beginnings, and he became one of the most powerful people in the world. It shows how ambitious he is, how strategic he is, and how much he believes in Russia. His time in the KGB, his martial arts background, and his distrust of the West, all of that has shaped how he leads. He likes to be in control, and he wants Russia to be a major power again. We may never know for sure how rich he is or what his ultimate goal is, but there's no doubt that he's had a huge impact on Russia and the world, and that impact is going to last for a long time.
Absolutely. Whether people see him as someone who saved Russia or as a dictator who made the world a more dangerous place, there's no question that he's changed the course of history.
So as you can see, understanding Vladimir Putin is complicated. It's about his personal life and his political skills and his beliefs about Russia and the world. We hope this deep dive has helped you see him in a new light. You know, a more complete picture.
There's so much to talk about, and we've really just scratched the surface. What stood out to you the most, Edward, from all this?
I think for me, it's that he's always been so disciplined and strategic. It's like a thread that runs through his whole life.
Yeah.
From being a kid who was really into martial arts to being a leader who makes these really calculated moves on the world stage. It's fascinating. What about you, Lily? What were your main takeaways?
I think his KGB experience and his distrust of the West are super important to understanding why he does what he does, like why he makes the decisions he makes and how he deals with other countries.
If you like this deep dive and you want to hear more about interesting topics like this, make sure to subscribe to Dansplain wherever you get your podcasts.
And for the latest episodes, articles, info on partner products, and more, you can find us at www.dansplain.xyz. We'd love to keep talking with you.